The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It pounded against the city like it was trying to wash away its sins. Inside St. Helena's Hospital, the fluorescent lights flickered, tired and pale. Nurses hurried through corridors. Doctors whispered over charts, and in room 214, a young girl sat alone on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at the storm outside. Her name was Lily. 16, small for her age with eyes that looked older than she was. Her hands were wrapped in gauze, trembling every time thunder rolled across the sky. She'd come in last night, broken ribs, bruises, a fractured wrist. They said she fell, but everyone who looked at her knew better. Down the hall, 2 police officers stood outside the nurses' station, speaking quietly with a social worker. "She doesn't want to go home," one of them said, "but legally, until there's proof, she'll have to return to her guardian," the other finished grimly. That guardian was her stepfather, a man the hospital staff already feared after his angry outburst earlier that day. They didn't know he was more than just a violent drunk. They didn't know he was connected, a small-time enforcer in a dirty corner of the city. And they definitely didn't know who was about to walk through the hospital doors. At 11:47 p.m., headlights flashed against the glass as 3 black SUVs pulled up outside the emergency entrance. The rain hissed against their hoods. From the first car stepped a tall man in a black coat, his slicked hair catching the light as he adjusted his cuffs. Vince Moretti. To the underworld, that name meant fear. To the city, it meant power. But tonight, to one girl he'd never met, it was about to mean something very different. He wasn't there for revenge. He wasn't there for business. He was there because of a single phone call. It came from a nurse named Elena, the daughter of one of his oldest allies. Her voice had trembled when she said, "Boss, she's just a kid, and he's coming back for her. I can't stop him." Now, as the automatic doors opened and the scent of antiseptic hit him, Vince stepped inside, calm, cold, silent. The night nurse at the desk froze mid-sentence. "Room 214, he said quietly. The nurse hesitated. "Sir, visiting hours." He slid a black card across the counter, his voice a shade lower. "Now," no one argued, "if this beginning gave you chills, hit like, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, protection, and redemption." The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and rain. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering like nervous heartbeats. Vince Moretti moved through it with quiet precision, each step deliberate, unhurried, his dark coat brushing against his legs like a shadow that knew where it belonged. Hospitals always reminded him of ghosts, of places where people came to either fight for life or surrender to silence. But tonight, the fight had come to him. He stopped at room 214 and looked through the small glass window. Inside sat a girl too small for her pain, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for another strike that never came. Her fingers, wrapped in gauze, fidgeted with a torn teddy bear's ear. Vince had seen 1,000 men beg for mercy, but nothing hit him like the sight of a child who'd already given up on it. He opened the door gently. The faint squeak made her flinch. That told him everything he needed to know about the kind of house she'd lived in. "Hey," he said softly. "You're Lily, right?" Her eyes darted up, cautious and tired. "Who are you?" "Just a friend." She shook her head. "You're not a doctor." "No." He gave a faint smile. "But I fix things too." She looked down again, hugging her teddy bear. "You should leave. My stepdad. He said he's coming back tonight." Her voice trembled like the rain outside. "He gets angry when people talk to me." Vince pulled a chair closer and sat down. "Then I guess I'll be here when he arrives." She blinked at him, confusion flickering across her face. "You don't understand. He hurts people." Vince's voice stayed low, calm as still water. He's about to learn what that feels like. For a second, the silence between them was thick enough to drown in. The monitors beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Lily studied him like she was trying to decide whether to trust a stranger who looked like danger in a suit. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Vince leaned back, eyes tracing the rain-streaked window. "Because a long time ago I needed help too, and nobody came." That answer made her look at him longer than she should have. She didn't know his name, didn't know he was one of the most feared men in the city, a man who'd made grown killers tremble. To her, he was just someone who didn't walk away. Outside the room, Marco, his right-hand man, leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, pretending to scroll through his phone. His earpiece crackled. "Boss," he murmured. "Got word from the lobby. 3 men entered the building. One's matching the stepfather's description. Drunk, loud, shouting at the guard." Vince didn't turn his head. "Security cameras?" "Off," Marco said grimly. "They cut power on their way in." Vince exhaled slowly. "Let them come." He stood, buttoned his coat, and adjusted his cuffs. The gesture was calm, too calm. It wasn't for intimidation. It was for control. He turned to Lily, who was watching him now, wide-eyed. "Lock the door behind me," he said. Her voice cracked. "Please don't hurt him. He'll just come back angrier." Vince's eyes softened for half a second. Not this time. He stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing Lily inside. Marco moved closer, hand near his jacket. "Boss, you sure you want to do this here? Cameras or not, it's a hospital." "Marco," Vince said quietly. "You ever seen a wolf walk into a church?" Marco frowned. "No." "Good," Vince said, heading down the corridor. "You're about to." The elevator dinged at the far end of the hall. 3 men stepped out, dripping rainwater onto the floor. The first, tall with a leather jacket and knuckles swollen from too many fights, spotted Vince instantly. He sneered, swaggering forward. "Who the hell are you? You the punk keeping my girl from me?" Vince didn't move, didn't blink. "You mean the girl you broke?" "She's mine," the man spat. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Vince's tone didn't rise above a whisper. "Neither do you." The stepfather lunged, his boots squealing against the tile. But before he could even raise a fist, Vince's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall so hard the plaster cracked. The man gasped, choking as Vince leaned in. Voice deadly calm. "You hit a woman again," Vince said softly. "And I'll make sure you never lift a hand in this life or the next." The 2 other men behind him hesitated, uncertain. Marco stepped forward, jacket open just enough for the gun to show. "Hospital's closed," he said coolly. "You boys want to walk out or be carried out?" The thugs backed up, but the stepfather, stubborn, arrogant, laughed through the blood trickling from his mouth. "You think she's worth all this?" "She's nothing. Her own mother didn't." The words died in his throat as Vince's hand tightened. "Say one more word about her," Vince murmured, "and you'll never speak again." The stepfather's face turned pale. The fight drained from him like water down a drain. Vince finally released him, letting him stumble to the floor. "Get out," he said. "And if you ever come near her again, the ground will remember your name before your family does." The man scrambled to his feet, nodding frantically, backing away. He looked at Marco, then at the gun, then at the cold fire in Vince's eyes, and fled. The hallway went still again, except for the sound of distant thunder. Marco exhaled. "You know, boss, you could have just scared him." "I did," Vince said, brushing dust from his sleeve. "That's why he's still breathing." He walked back toward room 214. The door cracked open before he even touched it. Lily stood there, eyes wide, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "He's gone," she whispered. "He won't be back," Vince replied. She hesitated, her small voice breaking. "Thank you." He nodded once. "Get some rest. You're safe now." But as he turned to leave, she said softly, "Please don't go." That single sentence stopped him cold. If you felt that moment hit deep, don't forget to like this video. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if a stranger walked in to protect you like that? The rain slowed to a whisper outside, but inside room 214, it felt like time had stopped. Lily stood barefoot on the cold hospital floor, her bandaged hands trembling against the blanket she clutched to her chest. The man who had just saved her life, the one who stood up to her stepfather without even blinking, was now at the door, ready to leave as if it was nothing. "Please don't go," she said again, her voice barely audible, cracking under the weight of everything she'd been holding in. Vince paused. There were words that broke through even the hardest silence, and that one did. He turned slightly, his face half lit by the dim fluorescent light. "You're safe now, Lily. That's all that matters." She shook her head. "No, I'm not." "You don't understand. He's not the only one." Vince frowned. "What do you mean?" Lily took a shaky breath. "He works for people. Bad people. They don't let anyone walk away. They'll come. They always come." That sentence landed heavier than it should have. Vince knew exactly the kind of men she was talking about. Men who used fear like a weapon, who believed control came from how many lives they could destroy without blinking. It was a language he understood all too well, because once it had been his own. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "How do you know that?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the window like someone expecting shadows to move. "I heard them. On the phone. They said if I ever talked, they'd..." Her voice caught. "They'd make sure no one found me." Vince's jaw tightened. There it was. The real danger. This wasn't just about one violent man. It was about the people behind him. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. "You're not going anywhere tonight," he said firmly. "Not until I say it's safe. But the police, they won't stop what's coming," he said flatly. "I will." Her eyes searched his face, trying to read the truth in it. "Who are you really?" He almost smiled. "Just someone who's tired of watching good people bleed." She didn't know how to answer that, and for a moment, the silence between them became strangely peaceful. The kind of silence that felt like safety. He moved to the door again, speaking over his shoulder. "Marco, get my car ready. No one in or out of this building without my word." Marco's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Already on it, boss. But we've got movement outside." 2 sedans parked across the street. Windows tinted. Vince's expression darkened. "Keep eyes on them." When he turned back to Lily, her face had gone pale. "They're here, aren't they?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Lily backed up until her legs hit the bed. "Please, I can't do this again," she whispered. "I can't." Vince knelt slightly to meet her eye level. His voice softened in a way that didn't sound like the man who ran a criminal empire. "You won't have to. Not while I'm here." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Why would someone like you care about me?" He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because someone once told me that protecting the innocent doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." "I forgot that for a long time." Lily swallowed hard. "And you remember it now?" He nodded once. "Because of you." For a moment she almost smiled, the first hint of light behind all that fear. But before she could speak, Marco's voice came again, sharper this time. "Boss, we've got a problem. They're not waiting anymore. They're coming in." Vince straightened instantly, his tone changing from calm to command. "Lock the back exits. Keep them off this floor." "Already moving," Marco said. "But there's at least 6 of them. They're armed." Vince turned to Lily. "Stay here, no matter what happens. Don't open this door unless you hear my voice. Got it?" She nodded, terrified but trying to be brave. "Please don't let them take me." He gave her a look so steady it almost felt like a promise. "They'll have to walk through me first." He left the room, and the door clicked shut behind him. The rain started again, soft and cold, like the city itself was holding its breath. Downstairs, the sound of boots echoed through the hospital lobby. Men in dark coats moved fast, pretending to be visitors. But to Vince's trained ear, the rhythm was wrong. Too quiet, too deliberate. Hunters pretending to be prey. Marco appeared beside him, gun under his jacket. They split up, 4 coming from the elevators, 2 from the emergency stairs. Vince's eyes narrowed. "Then we split them too." Marco smirked. "Hospital security's gonna love us." "Hospital security," Vince said dryly, "is going to pretend they didn't see anything." They took position near the end of the corridor. Just before the stairwell door creaked open, the first man stepped through, his hand brushing against the inside of his coat, reaching for something metallic. Vince didn't wait. One sharp move, one precise strike, and the man's gun clattered to the floor before he even realized who hit him. The second man barely had time to shout before Marco's elbow sent him sprawling against the wall. "Told you," Marco muttered. "They never learn." Vince moved like smoke, silent, deadly, efficient. The hallway filled with chaos, but not a single sound reached room 214. He made sure of that. Minutes later, it was over. The men who had come to take Lily were lying unconscious, their weapons scattered. Vince adjusted his coat, his breathing calm. He glanced at Marco. "Make sure the girl doesn't hear any of this." Marco nodded. "Boss, you're not going to tell her who you really are you?" Vince looked down the hall toward her door, the one small space of light in a place built on pain. "No," he said quietly. "She doesn't need another monster in her story." He turned away, walking toward the window as lightning flashed across the skyline. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a villain, just a man trying to make something right. If you believe even the coldest hearts can still protect the innocent, don't forget to like this video, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if a stranger risked everything for you? The storm had finally broken into a gentle drizzle by the time the chaos downstairs faded. Nurses whispered, pretending not to have seen what happened. The men who had come for Lily were being dragged quietly out the back entrance by Vince's men, unconscious and bruised, their guns wrapped in towels. The hospital lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, as if the building itself was exhaling in relief. Vince stood at the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. The city lights reflected off his face, sharp lines, cold eyes, but something softer had begun to crack through the armor. Behind him, Marco was on the phone, his tone low and clipped. "Yeah, 6 of them. No casualties. Tell Tony to burn their cars before the cops sniff around. And make sure their boss gets the message. Stay out of hospitals." When he hung up, Marco glanced over. "You're really not telling her who you are?" Vince didn't look away from the window. "Would you?" Marco shrugged. "You're the devil who showed up when she prayed." "Kinda poetic," Vince's lips twitched. "I'm no one's savior." "Maybe not," Marco said, pocketing his phone. "But tonight you played the part." Vince didn't answer. His reflection stared back at him, the man he'd become and the one he used to be. For years he'd ruled his world through fear and silence, but in the face of one trembling girl, all that power felt meaningless. He finally turned and walked back to room 214. The nurse on duty looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. "She's resting," the nurse whispered. "You should let her sleep." "I will," Vince said, but his hand was already on the door handle. The room was dimly lit, only the glow from the rain-washed window spilling across the sheets. Lily was asleep, curled on her side, one hand still gripping the little teddy bear. Her breathing was uneven. Not the peaceful kind, but the restless kind of someone whose dreams remembered what they wished to forget. Vince stood quietly by her bedside, his coat draped over his arm. For a man who'd ordered armies, standing still beside a broken soul felt like the hardest thing he'd ever done. Then, faintly, she murmured something in her sleep. At first, he thought it was nonsense, the slurred half-speech of a dream. But then he heard it clearly. A name, his name, Vince. His entire body froze. He leaned slightly closer, wondering if he'd imagined it. But no. She said it again, softer this time, a tear sliding down her cheek even as she slept. "Vince. Don't go." Something inside him twisted. Nobody had said his name like that in years. Not in fear, not in respect, but in hope. He sat down slowly, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving her. How did she even know his name? He'd never told her. Marco appeared at the door, tapping it lightly before entering. "Boss, car's ready. Back exit's clear." He stopped when he saw Vince sitting there, his usual composure cracked by something unspoken. "You okay?" Vince didn't move for a long moment. "She said my name," he finally murmured. Marco frowned. "She's asleep, I know." Marco leaned against the wall. "Maybe she heard one of us say it. Or maybe she's just got good instincts." Vince didn't respond. He reached out and gently adjusted the blanket over Lily's shoulder, careful not to wake her. The gesture was small, but it felt enormous. A man who'd broken bones now tucking someone in. "She's got no one, Marco," Vince said quietly. "No family, no safety. You saw what those men were willing to do." Marco sighed. "Boss, I know that look. You're about to make this personal." "It already is." Marco rubbed the back of his neck. You sure that's smart? You're the head of half this city's underworld. Bringing a kid into that? It's not exactly fatherly. Vince's gaze hardened. I'm not her father. Marco smirked. Keep telling yourself that. Vince shot him a look, but it didn't last. The truth was already written across his face. There was something about Lily. Something that reached through all the noise and made him remember who he used to be before he built his empire on fear. He stood. I'll make arrangements. Safe house first. Somewhere quiet, outside the city. No one finds her until I say so. Marco nodded. I'll handle it. But just as they turned to leave, Lily stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, disoriented, then saw him by the door. You're still here, she whispered. He paused. Yeah, for now, she hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you let them hurt you? You could have been killed because of me. Vince stepped closer, his voice barely above a murmur. Because you deserve to live without being afraid. Her lower lip trembled. Nobody ever said that to me before. Then it's about time someone did. And with that, he turned and left the room, his coat brushing against the doorway as he disappeared into the hall. But the sound of her whisper followed him like a ghost. Outside, the storm had eased into a quiet drizzle again. Marco glanced at him as they walked. You know, boss, he said lightly, you could have just written her a check and walked away. Vince didn't respond. He looked up at the gray morning light breaking through the clouds and said, almost to himself, You can't buy redemption. If that line hit your heart, go ahead and subscribe. There's more to come. Because this story's just getting started, and what Vince does next will change everything. The drive out of the city was quiet, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Rain tapped gently on the black SUV's windows as the city lights faded behind them, replaced by the soft blur of forest roads and the hum of tires against wet asphalt. Lily sat in the back seat beside a worn duffel bag Marco had packed with hospital clothes and a blanket. Her eyes were red but dry. She had no more tears left to give. Vince sat in the front, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other scrolling through messages on his phone. Every few seconds, the light from the screen illuminated the scars along his knuckles, small reminders of the life he'd lived before tonight. Marco drove, humming something faint under his breath, trying to make the silence less heavy. After a while, Lily spoke, her voice so soft it almost got lost under the rain. Where are we going? Vince looked up from his phone. Someplace quiet. You'll be safe there. Safe, she repeated, like the word was foreign. No one's ever said that to me and meant it. Vince turned slightly in his seat. I mean it. She looked down at the duffel bag on her lap. Do you take all the girls you save to secret places? Marco chuckled quietly. Kid's sharp, Vince shot him a warning glance. No, just you. Lily didn't press further. She just leaned her head against the cold window, watching the trees blur past. There was something strange about this man. Something dangerous, yes, but something steady, too. Like he'd seen every kind of pain and decided to stand between it and her. By the time they reached Hollow Creek, the rain had stopped. The safe house sat on the edge of a lake, its wooden porch dimly lit by a single bulb. It didn't look like much, just an old cabin tucked behind pine trees. But Marco had secured it years ago for moments exactly like this. No neighbors, no cell signal, no questions. Vince opened the door first. It's not fancy, he said quietly, but it's clean, warm, and no one knows it's here. Lily stepped inside slowly. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old books. A fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace. She looked around, clutching the blanket tighter. It's quiet. That's the point, Marco said, dropping a few grocery bags on the counter. You hungry? She shook her head. I'm okay, he frowned. You didn't eat since yesterday, Vince cut in gently. She'll eat when she's ready. Lily's eyes flicked toward him again, cautious but curious. Why are you doing all this for me? Vince took off his coat and hung it on the back of a chair. Because sometimes the right thing doesn't wait for the right reason. She tilted her head. That doesn't make sense. He almost smiled. It will someday. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid to breathe. After a few minutes, Marco headed outside to make a call, leaving them alone. The room was warm, lit by the fire's orange glow. Lily sat near the hearth, staring into the flames. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Vince nodded, leaning against the wall. "Fire's funny like that. Warm until you get too close." She looked up at him. "Are you like that too?" He met her eyes, the faintest trace of vulnerability in his. "I used to be worse." Her lips curved slightly, the closest thing to a smile he'd seen on her face. "You're not as scary as you look," he huffed a quiet laugh. "That's what I tell people right before they run." She giggled softly, surprising even herself. "You joke?" "Sometimes." The warmth in the room wasn't just from the fire anymore. It was from something unspoken. A fragile connection built not on trust, but on shared silence. Just then, Marco returned, brushing raindrops from his jacket. "Boss, we've got eyes near the city." Word spreading. The men who came for her? They worked for Dario. Vince's face hardened instantly. "Dario Romano?" "The same." Lily froze, her fingers tightening around the edge of her blanket. "I know that name." Vince turned toward her. "You've met him?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He used to come to our house. My stepfather worked for him. They always talked about money and about me." Something cold flared in Vince's chest. Dario wasn't just another name. He was a rival boss, one who thrived on chaos, the kind of man who thought fear was a currency. If he'd set his sights on Lily, it meant she wasn't just an abused girl. She was leverage. "Marco," Vince said sharply, "tighten the perimeter. Double the men around this property. No one gets within a mile without my say." Marco nodded, already moving. Lily looked up at Vince, her voice trembling. "He's coming for me, isn't he?" Vince crouched down in front of her, eyes level with hers. "Let him come," he said quietly. "I'll be waiting." She blinked back tears. "Why are you risking so much for me?" "Because you remind me what it means to have something worth protecting." Her breath caught. "You talk like someone who's lost a lot." He looked away. "You have no idea." The wind outside howled softly through the trees, but inside, the world felt still. Lily stared into the fire again, her reflection flickering in the glass. For the first time since she could remember, she wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to hope. And in that fragile moment, Vince made a silent promise to himself. No one would touch this girl again, no matter what it cost him. The next morning came with an eerie calm. The rain had stopped, leaving the woods wrapped in mist that hung low over Hollow Creek like smoke. From the porch of the cabin, the lake shimmered faintly in the gray light, perfectly still, too still, Vince thought. He'd seen mornings like this before, quiet enough to make you think the world was at peace. Right before it broke again. Inside, Lily sat at the wooden table, legs tucked under her, a bowl of oatmeal untouched in front of her. She'd barely spoken since sunrise. Her small fingers traced circles on the rim of the bowl, as if drawing invisible thoughts she couldn't say out loud. Vince poured himself a cup of black coffee and leaned against the counter. "You should eat," he said, his voice calm but firm. She nodded without looking up. "I'm not hungry." "Try anyway." Lily hesitated, then took a spoonful just to stop him from watching her. After a few seconds, she said quietly, "I had a dream last night." "About what?" "About my mom," she whispered. "She was cooking in our old kitchen. She looked happy, but when I tried to talk to her, she turned away. And her face wasn't hers anymore." She shivered. It was his. Vince set down his cup. "Dreams can't hurt you." "I know," she said, "but I think memories can." The words hit harder than she could have known. He knew all about memories that hurt, ghosts that followed him even when he thought he'd buried them. Before he could answer, the cabin door opened and Marco stepped in, wiping mud off his boots. "Morning, sunshine," he said with forced cheer before glancing at Vince. "We've got company." Vince straightened. "How close?" "Half a mile out near the logging trail," Marco said. "One guy, maybe two. I sent the perimeter scouts to check, but something feels off. He's not moving like a hunter. More like someone lost." Vince's jaw tightened. "No one finds this place by accident." Marco nodded. "That's what worries me. Lily looked between them, panic creeping into her eyes. Is it them? The men from before? Vince crouched in front of her again, his tone calm but commanding. I need you to stay here. No matter what happens, don't open this door. Marco will be right outside. I'm tired of being scared, she said softly. Every time someone comes, it feels like the end. Vince gave her a faint smile. Then maybe this time it's the beginning. He stood, buttoning his coat, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold and sharp, every breath visible. Through the trees, he could see faint movement. A figure stumbling along the narrow trail, clutching their arm. When the man finally came into view, Vince recognized him instantly. Tony Russo, he said under his breath. Tony was one of Dario's lieutenants, a man known for his loyalty, but also for his conscience, rare in their world. He was bleeding from a gunshot wound, dragging one leg through the mud. When he spotted Vince, he froze. Boss? Don't call me that, Vince said coldly. Tony held up his hands. I'm not here to fight. I came alone. Marco's gun was already drawn, aimed at his chest. You've got 5 seconds to make that sound like a good idea. Tony swallowed hard. Dario knows where she is. Vince's eyes narrowed. How? There's a leak in your crew, Tony said quickly. Someone sold you out. Dario's planning to come himself. Tonight. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Vince's voice dropped low. And you risked your life to tell me that? Tony nodded weakly. I owed you once. Remember the docks? You spared me when you didn't have to. Vince's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. And you think this makes us even? Tony shook his head. No, this makes me human again. He stumbled forward, collapsing to his knees. Marco lowered his gun, watching him warily. He's telling the truth, boss. Look at him. Vince sighed, motioning to Marco. Patch him up. Keep him here until I decide what to do with him. Tony grabbed his sleeve before he turned. Listen, Dario doesn't just want the girl. He wants you to hand her over personally. Says she's proof of what you used to be. Vince froze. What I used to be? Tony nodded weakly. He said she's not just some random kid. He said she's blood. The world went quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. Marco blinked. What the hell does that mean? Tony's breathing grew shallow. Ask yourself, boss. Where was she before your war with Dario started? Why does he want her so bad? Vince's pulse slowed, his thoughts racing. The idea sounded insane, impossible. But there was something about the way Dario had sent those men, the way they'd gone after Lily like she was more than a target. He turned sharply and strode back toward the cabin. Lily was standing by the window, staring at him through the glass, her reflection flickering against the pale morning light. When he entered, she asked quietly, Who was that man? Someone who should have stayed gone, he said. She hesitated. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. He sat down across from her, searching her face as if seeing it for the first time. The eyes, the hair, the small scar under her chin. There was something hauntingly familiar there. Something he couldn't quite admit. Lily, he said softly. How long ago did your mother die? Her brow furrowed. About 9 years ago. Why? Vince leaned back, his chest tight. 9 years ago. The same year everything in his world went up in flames. The same year he'd been betrayed by someone he trusted. Did she ever mention a man named Vince? He asked carefully. Lily looked startled. Once, she said after a pause. She said he was the only man she ever loved, and the reason we had to run. The room spun for a moment. Vince's breath caught in his throat. Marco stepped inside, his voice breaking the silence. Boss, say something. Vince looked at Lily, his voice barely a whisper. I think I just found the reason Dario wants her alive. If you're still with me and your heart's pounding, hit like. Because the truth that's coming next will flip everything you thought you knew. The fire had burned low by the time Vince found the courage to look at her again. The shadows danced across her face, painting her in gold and gray, and all he could see was her mother. The curve of her eyes, the tilt of her chin, the resemblance was too exact to ignore. It was like time had circled back to punish him for the life he'd chosen. Lily sat across from him, confusion flickering in her gaze. Why are you looking at me like that? Vince leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What was her name?" Lily hesitated. Her name was Isabella. The sound of it hit him like a bullet. He'd spent years burying that name under business, blood, and loyalty. But hearing it again, from the lips of a trembling girl, felt like the past had kicked open its coffin. "Did she ever talk about me?" he asked softly, afraid of the answer. "Sometimes," Lily said, her voice trembling. "When she was sick, she used to tell me stories about a man who wasn't afraid of anything. A man who gave her a necklace before everything went wrong." Vince froze. He didn't need her to describe it. He knew the one. A silver chain with a small coin charm he'd given Isabella the night before she disappeared. "Do you still have it?" he whispered. Lily nodded slowly and reached into her pocket. When she opened her palm, the charm glimmered faintly in the firelight. Tarnished, but unmistakable. Vince's chest tightened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "That belonged to me," she frowned. Then, I think I'm your father," he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavy and fragile, like glass about to shatter. Lily stared at him, wide-eyed, her mouth open but no words coming out. After a long silence, she shook her head. "No, that can't be true. My mom said my father was dead," Vince finished softly. "She told you that to protect you. She knew what kind of man I was." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You're lying. You're just saying that because you feel sorry for me." Vince didn't move. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, one he'd carried for nearly a decade. In it, Isabella stood smiling by the lake, sunlight in her hair, a secret she hadn't told him yet. He placed it gently on the table. She was already pregnant when she left. Lily's trembling fingers brushed the edge of the photo. Her voice cracked. "Then why didn't you come for us? Why did you let us live like that?" The question tore through him. "Because I didn't know," he said, voice rough. She vanished. "I looked for years. I thought she'd chosen to disappear. I never imagined she was hiding from the people I worked with." He leaned closer, desperate for her to understand. "Everything I built, all the power, all the fear, it cost me everything. And now I find out that everything included you." Lily stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "So what now? You think you can just show up and be my dad?" "No," Vince said quietly. "I know I can't fix the years I missed, but I can make sure no one hurts you again." She turned away, wiping her face with her sleeve. "You sound like a movie character." He almost smiled. "I wish I was. Then I could rewrite the ending." The sound of crunching gravel outside made Marco rush in, his gun already drawn. "Boss, 2 cars on the lower road, no headlights, moving slow." Vince's head snapped toward the window. "He's early." Lily turned, fear flooding back into her eyes. "Who?" "Dario," Vince said, standing up. "He's here," Marco cursed under his breath. "We've got 10 minutes, maybe less." "Get her to the back," Vince ordered. "If anything happens," Marco cut him off. "I know. I'll keep her alive." Lily grabbed Vince's arm. "Please don't go out there." He looked down at her, every wall he'd built cracking under the weight of her voice. "If I don't, he'll never stop. You'll never be free." Her tears fell faster now. "I just found out you're my dad. I don't want to lose you too." He brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand, something he'd never done for anyone. "You won't." Then he turned to Marco, his tone steel again. "Lock down the house. And if I don't make it back." Marco glared. "Don't start that," Vince gave him a thin smile. "Just promise me you'll take care of her." Marco nodded once. "Like she's my own." As Vince stepped out onto the porch, the wind carried the smell of gasoline and gunmetal. The trees whispered with the movement of men who thought they were hunters. But tonight, the devil they'd come for was a father, and that made him far more dangerous. He lit a cigarette, took one drag, and flicked it into the mud. "Come on, Dario," he muttered. "Let's finish what you started." And somewhere behind him, through the crack of thunder and the glow of firelight, Lily pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "Please come back." The first gunshot shattered the night like lightning through glass. Crows scattered from the trees as echoes rolled through Hollow Creek. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain. A storm above and another one unfolding below. Vince crouched behind the porch railing, scanning the tree line. Shadows moved between the pines, silent, trained, ruthless. Dario didn't send amateurs. He sent killers. Inside the cabin, Marco was sealing the back door with a steel bar he'd pulled from the basement. "Boss, we've got 6, maybe 7 men surrounding the perimeter," he shouted through the comm in Vince's ear. "They've got silencers and night vision." Vince took a breath, steady and deliberate. "Make sure Lily stays low. She's in the crawl space. Scared but quiet." "Good," Vince said, loading his weapon. "Keep her that way." From the edge of the forest, a voice rang out, loud and cold. "Moretti!" Vince's jaw clenched. That voice could only belong to one man. "Dario Romano, you took something that belongs to me," Dario shouted. "Hand over the girl, and maybe I'll let you crawl out of here alive." Vince stepped into the open, rain soaking through his black shirt. "You've always had a bad habit of thinking people belong to you, Dario." Dario emerged from the dark, flanked by his men. He looked older now, but his eyes burned with the same cruel arrogance that had once made him untouchable. "Ah, Vince Moretti," he sneered. "The legend himself. Hiding in the woods with a little girl. I'd say you've fallen, my friend." "We were never friends," Dario smirked. "You're right. You were just a dog that forgot who owned him." The words hit like a knife, but Vince didn't flinch. "You made one mistake," he said quietly. "You came after my blood." Dario laughed, low and menacing. "Oh, you mean Isabella's little secret? Don't act so shocked, Vince. You think I didn't know she was carrying your child? You think I didn't help her disappear?" Vince froze. "You helped her what?" "I gave her a place to hide," Dario said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Until she stopped being useful. Then your girl's dear stepfather owed me money. And well, let's just say I collected." Rage flickered across Vince's face like a flame catching dry wood. The rain fell harder, thunder rolling like war drums. "You killed her," Dario shrugged. "Collateral damage." That was the last thing he said before Vince moved. The world exploded in gunfire. Vince's first shot tore through the nearest guard, dropping him instantly. The second clipped the shoulder of another man as Marco burst through the side door, laying down cover fire. "Down!" Marco yelled, pulling Vince behind a fallen tree. "We're outnumbered!" "Not outmatched," Vince growled. For the next few minutes, the forest was chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the trees like lightning strikes, bullets slicing through the rain. Vince fought like a man possessed. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for something deeper. For a little girl hiding beneath the floorboards who called him Dad. "Boss!" Marco shouted over the storm. "They're flanking right." Vince rolled from cover and fired 3 precise shots, dropping 2 more men. The third managed to graze his arm, but he didn't stop. Pain was nothing new. It was a language he spoke fluently. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Lily pressed her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. Every bang echoed through her bones, every scream another reminder of a world she'd never been meant to see. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't let him die." Outside, the rain turned crimson in patches where bodies hit the ground. Only Dario remained standing, stepping forward with slow, deliberate strides, his gun aimed straight at Vince's chest. "You can't save her," Dario hissed. "You'll just make her another ghost in your collection." Vince's eyes narrowed. "Maybe. But I'll make sure you're the last one she ever fears." He fired once. The shot echoed through the trees like thunder breaking the sky. Dario staggered backward, disbelief etched on his face. Then he fell, his gun slipping from his fingers. The forest went silent. Vince stood still for a long moment, rain washing blood and mud from his hands. Marco approached cautiously, checking the perimeter. "It's over," he said quietly. "No," Vince murmured, looking toward the cabin where a faint light flickered through the window. "It's just beginning." He walked slowly toward the porch, every step heavier than the last. When he opened the door, Lily ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, trembling. "You came back," she sobbed. He rested a hand on her head, his voice soft but sure. "I told you I would." For the first time in years, Vince Moretti smiled, a real one. Not the kind you wear for business or control, the kind that comes from finally finding something worth saving. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled like smoke and gunpowder. Rainwater carried thin streams of blood through the mud outside the cabin, painting silent trails between the trees. Marco's men were already clearing the bodies, moving with quiet efficiency, their faces grim but relieved. Vince stood on the porch, one arm bandaged, staring into the forest where Dario had fallen. The weight of the night pressed down on him, heavier than the wound in his arm. He'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Marco joined him, lighting a cigarette. "They're gone," he said softly. "Every last one of them. No survivors." Vince didn't look at him. "There never are. You did what had to be done. That's what I've told myself my whole life," Vince murmured. "Until now, I'm not sure I believe it anymore." Marco exhaled a long breath of smoke. "You're bleeding conscience again, boss. That's a good sign." Vince gave him a faint, humorless smile. "Don't get sentimental on me." "Someone has to," Marco replied, flicking ash into the rain. "That girl in there? She's the first thing in years that's made you fight for something besides revenge. Maybe that's worth holding on to." Vince finally turned toward him, eyes softer than usual. "You ever think about what we could have been if we'd never joined this life?" Marco laughed quietly. "Yeah. Poor." For a brief moment, they both smiled. Two men standing in the ruins of everything they'd built, finally realizing what it had cost them. Inside the cabin, Lily sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket too big for her small frame. The firelight danced across her face, catching the glimmer of the necklace she never took off. When she saw Vince step back inside, she ran to him without hesitation. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "It's nothing," he replied, brushing off her worry. "Your arm's bleeding again," he sighed. "You sound like your mother." That made her pause. "What was she like?" Vince knelt down beside her. "She was brave, kind, too good for this world." "Too good for me." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She missed you." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I missed her too." There was a long silence, filled only by the crackling of the fire. Then, Lily reached up and placed her small hand over his. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. Vince's chest tightened. He'd lived his entire life commanding men, empires, and fear. But in that moment, a 10-year-old girl had given him something no one else ever could. Peace. Marco entered quietly, glancing between them. "We should move soon," he said. "The cops will start sniffing around once they find what's left of Dario's crew." Vince nodded. "The safe house in the hills, make sure it's ready." "What about the rest of the organization?" Marco asked. "They'll want to know who's in charge now." Vince looked toward the fire, his expression unreadable. "I'm done being in charge," Marco blinked. "What do you mean, done?" "I mean this ends tonight," Vince said firmly. "No more blood. No more debts. I'll dissolve everything. Every operation, every front." "We start over," Marco frowned. "You think they'll let you walk away?" "They don't get a choice." Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Start over like normal people?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that." She tilted her head. "Do normal people eat pancakes for breakfast?" He chuckled softly. "I guess they do." "Then we can start tomorrow," she said, determination flickering in her eyes. Marco laughed under his breath. "Kid's already running the show." Vince looked at her, warmth finally breaking through the steel in his voice. "Maybe that's exactly what I need." Outside, the rain began again, soft this time, not angry like before. It washed the blood from the earth as if trying to give the night a second chance. Vince stood at the window watching it fall. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to run or fight. He felt something else. Hope. If you've ever believed that broken people can still build something good, hit like and tell me in the comments what you think Vince should do next. Should he stay hidden or face his past once and for all? The morning after the storm, Hollow Creek looked like a different world. The air was clean, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Sunlight slipped through the clouds, scattering gold across the lake. For the first time in years, Vince Moretti woke up to quiet. Not the kind that follows violence, but the kind that feels like forgiveness. He stepped outside, shirt sleeves rolled up, his arm tightly bandaged but healing. The ground still bore scars of the night before. Bullet holes in the porch railing, a cracked window, muddy footprints that led nowhere. Yet somehow everything felt lighter. Marco was already on the porch, sipping coffee and pretending not to watch him. "You look terrible," he said casually. Vince smirked. "You should see the other guy." Marco chuckled, handing him a mug. "So what's the plan now? The whole city's gonna be talking by sundown. Dario's gone, his men are scattered. You could take everything he built and double it in a week." Vince looked out at the lake, the reflection of sunlight dancing across the water. "That's what the old me would do," he said quietly. "But I think I'm done building empires made of ghosts." Marco raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "I'm tired, Marco. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of burying men who called me brother. Tired of waking up with blood on my hands and pretending it's purpose." He sipped his coffee, his gaze distant. "Maybe it's time I learned what it means to live instead of survive." Marco studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Never thought I'd see the day Vince Moretti retired." Vince gave a small, almost wistful grin. "Neither did I." Inside, laughter drifted from the kitchen. Lily stood on a stool, stirring pancake batter in a bowl almost too big for her. The sleeves of one of Vince's shirts were rolled up past her elbows, and flour streaked her cheek. "Are you sure I'm doing this right?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. Vince stepped inside, leaning against the doorway. "Depends. Are you trying to make pancakes or concrete?" She giggled. "They're just lumpy." "That's all right," he said, walking over to help her stir. "The first batch is supposed to be. Did you used to cook?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "No, but your mom tried to teach me once." Lily's smile faltered slightly. "You must have loved her a lot." Vince's voice softened. "More than anything." She looked up at him, her big brown eyes shimmering. "Then maybe she sent me so you wouldn't be alone." He froze for a moment, the words sinking deep. Then he smiled and ruffled her hair. "You might be right about that." They sat at the table, sharing the first real breakfast either of them had had in a long time. Outside, birds returned to the trees, and for once, there were no engines roaring down the road, no men watching from the shadows. Just peace. Marco leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You know, boss, this doesn't suit you." "What doesn't?" "Domestic bliss," he teased. "You a kid, pancakes? It's like something out of a postcard." Vince smirked. "Then maybe it's time I learn how to live in one." Marco grinned. "You really think you can walk away clean?" Vince's expression darkened for a moment. "No one walks away clean, but I can walk away better." A silence fell between them, one filled with unspoken respect, years of loyalty condensed into a glance. Marco finally nodded. "Then I guess this is goodbye." Vince looked at him. "You don't have to go back, you know. There's room here for people who want peace." Marco chuckled. "You forget. I wouldn't know what to do with peace." Vince extended his hand. "Then thank you for everything." Marco shook it firmly. "Take care of her. She's your second chance." When Marco's car disappeared down the dirt road, Vince stood there for a long time, watching until it was just dust and sunlight. Then he turned back toward the cabin, where Lily's laughter echoed faintly through the walls. He realized something then, something simple but powerful. He'd spent his whole life trying to control the world. Now he just wanted to protect one small part of it. He walked back inside, closing the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking felt like the final chapter of one story, and the quiet beginning of another. If you believe even the coldest hearts can find warmth again, hit like, and tell me in the comments, should Vince stay hidden in peace, or face the world again as a changed man? For a while, peace actually held. Vince woke to the smell of coffee instead of gunpowder. Lily's laughter filled the mornings, and at night, they watched the sun sink into the lake through the window of the cabin. It almost felt like a life borrowed from someone else. Someone who hadn't sinned. Someone who still believed in the simple good things. Lily went to a small local school under a new name, Lily Romano, the papers said. Vince couldn't help but smile when he saw it. It was safer that way. Nobody in Hollow Creek needed to know who she really was, or who her father used to be. Every day, Vince drove her to school in an old black pickup that rattled like a dying engine. He'd wait until she ran up the steps, her tiny backpack bouncing, then linger a moment longer. Because for the first time in his life, watching someone walk away didn't feel like loss. It felt like purpose, but peace, Vince had learned long ago, was a fragile thing. It doesn't ask permission before it breaks. One evening, as he sat by the fire reading one of Lily's storybooks, she'd insisted he needed practice. The phone rang. He hadn't given that number to anyone but Marco. His hand froze mid-page. He picked it up. Yeah? Silence. Then a voice deep and calm. You left a lot of unfinished business, Moretti. Vince's eyes narrowed. Who is this? You don't know me, the man said, but I know you, and I know the little girl you're hiding in that cabin. She looks a lot like Isabella, doesn't she? Every muscle in Vince's body tensed. If you touch her? Oh, I won't, the man interrupted. But others might. You made enemies in more places than Dario's, and some of them think the daughter of Vince Moretti is worth a fortune. The line went dead. Vince sat in silence, the hum of the fire now louder than his heartbeat. The peace he'd built, the quiet he'd bled for, all of it teetered on the edge of collapse. Moments later, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The night was colder than usual, moonlight spilling across the wet ground. Somewhere an owl called, low, haunting, like a warning. Marco had warned him this might happen. You can bury your name, but not your past. He'd been right. When he stepped back inside, Lily was half asleep on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Go on to bed, sweetheart, he whispered. Big day tomorrow. She mumbled something about pancakes and turned over. Vince stood there for a long while watching her. Then he whispered to himself, not again, never again. That night, he opened the safe hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside was the life he'd tried to forget. 2 pistols, a black ledger, and a small envelope with Marco's name scrawled on it. He took out one of the guns and checked the magazine. Still loaded, still ready. As he clicked the safety off, the sound echoed in the cabin like thunder. If you've ever had something you'd give your life to protect, hit like. Because for Vince Moretti, peace was over. And what came next would change everything. The next morning, the sun rose behind a veil of mist. Hollow Creek looked peaceful, but Vince felt the storm brewing long before the sky did. He sat by the window, his coffee untouched, eyes tracing the tree line. Every shadow felt heavier. Every silence felt watched. Lily was at the kitchen table, coloring quietly, humming to herself. She looked so normal, so untouched by the violence of the world that had built her life from ashes. Vince wished he could freeze that moment, keep her there, in light and innocence, far away from the dark corners of his past. But he knew better. The world always came collecting. His phone buzzed. An encrypted message. No name, no trace, just one line. They found you. Vince's heart slowed. He set the phone down, calm and deliberate, though his pulse thundered beneath his skin. Lily, he said softly, pack your things. She looked up, confused. Why? I have school. I know, he said, forcing a small smile. But how about we take a little trip instead? Somewhere new. Her eyes lit up. Like a vacation? He hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Exactly like that. She jumped from her chair and ran to her room to grab her backpack, her laughter echoing down the hallway. Vince turned toward the door, his face now expressionless, the mask of the man he'd sworn never to become again. Marco's words echoed in his head. You can leave the world, but it doesn't leave you. He picked up the phone again, calling a number he hadn't used in years. The line rang once, then a familiar voice answered, gravelly and calm. Didn't think I'd hear from you again? I need a favor, Vince said. Now, there was a pause. How bad? They know where I am. Then it's already bad. I'll handle it, Vince said. I just need time. I need her out of this. The man sighed. I can get you safe passage out of the state, but if they're tracking, they'll follow you no matter where you go. Then I'll make sure they stop following. Vince. The voice softened. Don't do this alone again. He hung up. Moments later, the faint crunch of tires on gravel made him freeze. He looked out the window. A black SUV was parked halfway down the road, its windows tinted, engine idling. Of course, he muttered under his breath. He walked to Lily's room. She was stuffing a small teddy bear into her bag. Sweetheart, he said, kneeling beside her. No matter what happens, you don't look back. Understand? She blinked up at him. Did I do something wrong? No, he whispered, voice thick. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. That's why I'm not letting anyone take you away. He grabbed his coat, tucking a gun inside. The weight of it felt both familiar and disgusting, like shaking hands with an old ghost. Outside, the engine of the SUV revved once, and two figures stepped out. Vince recognized the way they moved. Disciplined, slow, confident. Not random thugs. Professionals. He cracked the front door open just enough to hear the gravel crunch under their boots. Then he whispered a prayer. Not to be forgiven, but to be fast. A single shot cracked through the morning air. One man dropped instantly. The other dove for cover, returning fire toward the porch. Lily screamed from inside. Vince fired again. 1, 2, 3. Every bullet clean and precise. Then silence. He stepped down the porch, boots splashing in the puddles left from last night's rain. The SUV's door hung open. Inside, he found a phone still recording, streaming live to an encrypted feed. He picked it up, staring at the screen. A man in a dark suit stared back from the other side, smiling faintly. Well done, Moretti, the man said. It's good to see you haven't softened. Who are you? Vince demanded. Let's just say, an old admirer. Dario was small time. You took something far more valuable than his pride. And I'm here to collect. The line cut off. Vince threw the phone into the mud, his jaw tightening. The ghosts weren't coming back one by one. They were coming in waves. He turned toward the cabin, where Lily stood trembling in the doorway, clutching her teddy bear. Are we leaving now? She whispered. Yes, he said, his voice low but steady. And we're not coming back. The cabin was silent except for the faint hum of rain tapping against the window. Lily sat on the couch, clutching her teddy bear, while Vince moved through the rooms methodically, locking doors, loading clips, and stuffing maps, cash, and a burner phone into a black duffel. The calm in his face didn't match the chaos inside him. Every instinct, every scar, every old memory told him one thing. This wasn't over. He'd been hunted before, but this time was different. They weren't after his money or power. They wanted the one thing that could still break him. When Lily whispered, "Are they coming back?" He froze for a moment before answering. Not if I stop them first. He knelt beside her, brushing a tear from her cheek. Do you remember that road we drove on the first day we came here? The one that disappeared into the woods. She nodded slowly. There's a man waiting at the end of it. He's a friend. You'll go with him, okay? He'll take you somewhere safe. Her lips quivered. But what about you? He hesitated, then forced a small smile. I'll be right behind you. It wasn't a lie, not completely. He'd follow her once the ghosts were buried. Outside, the clouds thickened again. The mountain road was wet and narrow, the kind that swallowed sound. As Vince guided the old pickup through the bends, he caught glimpses of black shapes in the tree line, vehicles barely visible, pacing him from a distance. They'd found him faster than he expected. By the time they reached the forest turnoff, he could feel his pulse pounding through the steering wheel. He stopped the truck, turned to Lily, and smiled softly. You've been brave since the moment I met you. I'm scared, she whispered. Good, he said gently. That means you know what's worth losing. Headlights flickered in the distance, not his, not friendly. Time was up. He reached into his coat and handed her a small locket. Inside was a photo of her mother, Clara, smiling under the glow of city lights. Keep this with you, he said, It's your mother's strength. And mine. Lily threw her arms around him. For a brief second, the world stopped. The noise, the danger, everything. Just gone. Then he kissed her forehead and whispered, "Run." She sprinted down the path toward the waiting cabin hidden in the woods. Vince turned back to the road, his eyes now cold. The headlights grew larger. 3 black SUVs moving in formation. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small detonator. "You wanted to find me," he murmured. "So come and see what's left." When the first SUV skidded around the corner, the forest erupted in light. A wall of fire swallowed the road, hurling metal and dust into the air. 2 more vehicles slammed to a stop behind them, men spilling out, shouting, disoriented. Vince stepped out from behind the wreck, the rain sizzling against the flames, his pistol raised. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. Gunfire tore through the night. Vince moved like a shadow, quick, precise, ruthless. For every shot they fired, his found its mark. He wasn't the man who'd left this life behind. He was the man it had built. When the smoke cleared, only one man was left standing. The driver, bleeding but alive, crawling toward the wreck. Vince grabbed him by the collar. "Who sent you?" The man coughed, half choking. "They said, the girl belongs to the Circle." "The Circle?" Vince's brow furrowed. "What the hell do they want with her?" "She's not just a girl," the man gasped. "Her mother. She took something from them. Before she died." "What?" But the man's eyes rolled back. Dead. Vince stood there for a long time, the rain washing blood from his face, his mind racing. Clara had been running from something bigger than Dario, something older, deeper. The Circle wasn't a gang. It was something far worse. He turned toward the woods where Lily had disappeared, and for the first time since that night she'd knocked on his door. Vince felt something he hadn't in years. Real fear. If you believe a man's past can't stay buried forever, hit like, and tell me in the comments, should Vince face the Circle head on? Or vanish with Lily before they find her again? The forest was silent again, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind that listened. The kind that waited. Vince stood among the wreckage, the rain whispering against the burning metal, and felt the air grow colder. He'd spent his life surrounded by killers, but even they had names, faces, reasons. The Circle was different. It wasn't about territory or revenge. It was about power that stayed invisible. And somehow Clara had crossed it. He ran a hand through his wet hair, eyes fixed on the tree line. Every instinct told him Lily was already in danger. He grabbed his gun, sprinted down the muddy path that led deeper into the woods. The old trees swallowed him whole. Somewhere in the distance he heard a faint sound, Lily's voice. When he reached the cabin, the door was wide open. His stomach dropped. "Lily!" he called out. Nothing, only the wind. Then, from behind the door, a voice. "You came quicker than I thought." A man stepped out, tall, dressed in gray, the kind of calm that made your skin crawl. Vince raised his weapon instantly. "Where is she?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Safe for now. We don't harm children, Mr. Moretti, but we do need what her mother took." Vince's finger tightened on the trigger. "You've got 3 seconds to explain before I stop asking." The man smiled faintly, as if amused. "Clara Romano worked for us once, before she realized who she was working for. She was meant to deliver a file, one that could have destroyed the Circle's entire network. Instead, she ran." Vince's heart pounded. "And now you think she gave it to me?" The man stepped closer. "Not to you, to your daughter." Vince froze. "She's 8, the man's smile didn't fade. "And yet she carries something that belongs to us. Maybe she doesn't even know it. But we'll find it, sooner or later." He moved his hand slightly, and Vince saw the glint of a tattoo, an ancient symbol, coiled like a serpent swallowing its own tail. Vince fired. The bullet tore through the man's shoulder, spinning him backward, but he didn't scream. He just laughed, a hollow, chilling sound, and vanished into the trees. Vince ran inside, calling for Lily. His eyes swept the room until he spotted a small figure crouched behind the bed, trembling. When she saw him, she burst into tears. "I did what you said. I didn't move," she cried. He knelt and held her tight. "You did perfect, sweetheart. You did perfect." As he held her, he noticed something clutched in her hand, a silver pendant he'd never seen before. It wasn't the locket he'd given her. This one was heavier, engraved with the same serpent symbol he'd seen on the man's wrist. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Mama told me to never take it off," she whispered. "She said it would keep me safe." Vince stared at it, realization dawning like a slow, cold dawn. It wasn't a keepsake. It was the key they were after. He pocketed the pendant carefully and looked out the window. He could feel them closing in already. The circle didn't stop. That night, he packed everything they had left: food, cash, the pendant, and a promise he couldn't afford to break. "We're leaving tonight," he said. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, wiping her tears. "Somewhere they can't find us," he replied. "And if they do, they'll wish they hadn't." He lifted her into the truck, the engine coughing to life, and as the cabin disappeared in the rearview mirror, Vince's expression hardened into something colder than resolve. He'd spent his whole life fighting men who bled, but now he was fighting something that didn't. If you've ever had to protect someone when the whole world seemed to be closing in, hit like and tell me in the comments, should Vince open the pendant? Or keep its secret buried forever? The road out of Hollow Creek twisted through the mountains like a scar. The fog was thick, swallowing the headlights, the world shrinking to just the sound of rain and the hum of the truck's engine. Lily slept against Vince's arm, her tiny hand still holding onto the edge of his coat. She didn't know that every mile he drove was borrowed time. The pendant lay on the dashboard, catching the faintest light. Vince couldn't stop looking at it. Clara had died to protect it. The circle had killed to retrieve it, and somewhere inside it was the truth that tied them all together. He pulled off the road near an abandoned church, the same one where he'd once sworn to leave this life behind. The air smelled like whetstone and memory. He carried Lily inside, setting her down on a bench, then sat across from her, the pendant cold in his hand. He turned it over, running his thumb along the serpent engraving until he felt something click. A small latch opened on the back, revealing a folded strip of paper, yellowed with age. Inside, a list of names: politicians, judges, police chiefs. At the top, a mark he recognized instantly. The circle wasn't just an organization, it was an empire that ruled from the shadows. And Clara had stolen their truth. Vince exhaled slowly. The pendant wasn't just a secret, it was leverage. Enough to bring the circle to its knees, or enough to destroy everyone he loved. "Papa?" Lily's sleepy voice broke the silence. "Are we safe now?" He looked at her, at the small, fragile life that had somehow survived everything the world had thrown at her. And for the first time in years, he smiled. "We will be." But deep down, he knew peace wasn't something men like him got to keep. He folded the list and slipped it back inside the pendant, locking it shut. Then he kissed Lily's forehead, stood, and pulled out his phone. The same burner he'd used to disappear years ago. He dialed a number only one man would recognize. "Marco," he said when the voice answered. "Vince," came the reply, weary but steady. "You're still alive. For now," Vince said. "Listen, if anything happens to me, there's a girl named Lily. You'll protect her." Marco hesitated. "What are you planning?" Vince looked out at the dark horizon, the faint glow of headlights miles away. "I'm ending this." He hung up and stepped outside into the rain. The sound was deafening now, a storm building around him. He stood there for a moment, letting it wash over him, then whispered a promise to the woman who had started it all. "You wanted her safe. Clara, I'll make sure she stays that way." When the first black SUV appeared on the hill, Vince didn't run. He walked toward it, calm, ready. The doors opened. Figures stepped out, weapons drawn, but before they could fire, Vince threw the pendant into the mud between them. "That's what you came for," he said. "Take it, but understand something." He took a step closer, his voice low and sharp. "If you ever come near her again, I'll burn the circle to the ground. One name at a time." For a long moment, no one moved. Then one of them picked up the pendant and gave a small nod. "Understood, Mr. Moretti." The SUVs drove off into the rain, disappearing down the winding road. When Vince turned back, Lily was standing in the church doorway, tears streaming down her face. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He smiled softly. It's just rain, sweetheart. He scooped her up, holding her close. We're going home, he said. Where's home? She asked. Wherever you are, he answered. The storm began to fade, the clouds breaking apart as dawn crept over the mountains. For the first time in years, Vince Moretti, once a feared mafia boss, now a man trying to earn redemption, felt something he thought he'd buried forever. Hope. And as he walked down the empty road with the child who had saved his soul, the world felt quiet again. Not because the danger was gone, but because love had finally silenced the fear. If this story touched you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, do you believe a man like Vince deserves redemption, or are some sins too heavy to forgive?